Hi, guys. Welcome back to another episode of More Than a Statistic. I'm your host, Justin Griffin. I got 11 years clean, and I'm just grateful to be a part of this and to still be doing this. I asked my friend Chris here to come out tonight, and it was a big ask because he's still coming out of the addiction and the recovery part's new to him, and we're just going to share where he's at right now because I got reached out to by a few people this week about people being in active addiction, and they don't know where to start, Chris. And you know what was incredible was Chris was one of the first viewers of this idea when we come up with it, and he even got TikTok just for it because originally we were only on TikTok. So he downloaded the app, and God worked through all of us, and he was the first person to reach out to us because of this podcast that we've been doing. And since then, me and him agreed. I wasn't in church at the time. We was newly doing this. God was working on me. And I decided, and he decided that we'd keep each other accountable and we'd start going to the same church together. And we've been doing so for the last few months. So I'm going to turn it over to him. I'm going to let him introduce himself and kind of tell what he wants to tell. And we'll just see what the Lord does with this conversation tonight. So you.
Well, yeah, my name's Chris. We've been buddies for a long time, really. I'm kind of long-time friends with your brother-in-law, so that's how we kind of came into each other's lives. Yeah, I guess we'll start with, the podcast moment where, you started doing it for, whatever reason you started doing it for, and I got a notification one day out of nowhere on Facebook that something is, usually it's just something I would ignore, but I clicked on it and you know, it was a right message I needed to hear right then from especially somebody like you who was in my life. I knew you, we hung out, we bullshit. I don't, sorry for the language. We hang out, watch football, all that stuff, but then I saw a whole nother side that, I'd never seen before. I knew a little bit about the past or whatever, but it's never really been a topic of conversation between me and you. And as I watched and listened to you talk about your struggles and your experience, like it just, it made me realize there's a whole nother person there, a whole nother story, and it made me kind of start reflecting on myself a little bit, and I think the big moment for me, kind of what I got out of it, and what was really the start of, the start of me kind of really taking a look at myself, and it was just realizing, confronting the lie, because the past few years, especially, you know, I've been what I would call a high functioning alcoholic, like, yeah, I drink, but, I make sure I get all my stuff done first. I try not to I very much focus on my son and making sure he's taken care of, but, for a long time I've struggled with, just trying to quiet the voices, I think, a little bit, um, I guess we should go back a little bit. You know, childhood, a little bit of my background is, in high school I struggled heavily with heavy substances, all the worst stuff. I had my, dances with all of it, and I jumped around from sort of addiction to addiction, and, through my early 20s, it was a miracle that I'm still here to survive, from all the, anything you can think of. Yeah, I was there. I remember what it tastes like, what it does, all that stuff. My journey with hard drugs, sort of I tried to come to a close about 26. I struggled with it for about a year, and then I was able to get on the Suboxone program, and for me, that was a good answer at the time, and I did what I was supposed to do. I worked the program, I didn't misuse the drug, I went to meetings, and I got my dose down, like real low and everything, and it got to a point in life where I just like accepted that was part of my life, that's just something I take. It's like, one thing that I've struggled with also in my life is, which, hey, this might be a new one to you, bipolar. I've been, on bipolar medication since I was, the one that worked, was about, I started taking around 25 or whatever, and that really started having an effect on, that's what led me to get to the decision to get off the hard drugs and whatnot or whatever. But, yeah, I stayed stable on the Suboxone for years. Like I said, it just became part of life, and I was comforted in the fact that, like, nobody knew about it. You know what I mean? It was my secret. Nobody had to know about it. I didn't have to tell anybody about it. I was doing all the things I was supposed to do, and I had my life together at the time. My job was going good. I got married. We were happy. We decided to have a family. And then, shortly after we decided to have a family, we talked about this earlier, that was sort of my canon event, was the divorce. In 2020, 1 month I was happily married. My wife, we were expecting a child. We were very excited about it. It was not an accident, My wife decided she wanted to, have a family, be together and all that. We were excited to have a boy. Everything was going great. And then COVID hit, right in the middle of her being pregnant. And that sort of began the downfall of everything. Everything started crumbling. I was a restaurant manager at the time, so the way COVID was affecting that, it obviously had a huge effect, and I ended up getting out of that because I thought that was what was best for the family at the time. So I switched jobs, started on a whole new career path. My son was born, Reese, happy, healthy baby boy. Everything was beautiful, fine. About 6 months after he was born, things started getting really, I don't want to get into any certain things, things started getting rough around the house, it was clear that my wife was very unhappy, all of a sudden, and, I was trying to do everything I could, she was saying it was postpartum depression, it was this and that, and I was bending over backwards trying to hold it all together, she had been out of work for a while, so we had that COVID check coming for a little while, so that kind of balanced the, the income situation a little bit. But I was trying so hard to hold it all together, And I remember, that was rough times because I had a baby to take care of too, So I was trying to work to advance quickly as I could in this new career, and try to take care of her, save the marriage, take care of the baby, this and that, and well, that all came to a head. I remember the date, June 11th in 2021 is kind of the day everything, we'll not get into it, but it came crashing down, and, it was a long battle. There was infidelity, and that was very hard. I ended up dealing with a lot of stuff that I was very unprepared to deal with, that I felt that I was not made to deal with whatsoever, There was infidelity that I had to deal with that was right in my face, that was rough to deal with. Immediately, I was left in care of our kid, he was 11 months old, and all of a sudden mom's gone. And I didn't know what to do with a baby, what I mean? Like, I tried.
Especially first one.
Yeah, first one, when we talked about having a family, I was stoked about it, and I thought, sure, I can work 10, 15 more hours of overtime a week while I come play for a few minutes, when I get home. The thought of being a single father never crossed my mind, and I was vastly unprepared for that. And so, yeah, that flipped my whole life upside down, and that was sort of the beginning of, like, the dark years for me, Me and Reese ended up moving in with my mom and dad, which have, I love. They're still alive, and I'm grateful to spend as much time with them as I can. But as a 40-year-old man, it's not easy moving back in with mom and dad. First it was supposed to be a temporary thing. We immediately started looking for houses, and, the more things developed, I realized that it's going to be awful rough for me and him to. The situation just became where it's going to be a lot easier for us to stay. So we ended up staying put, and that's where we are today. And I've spent the past 5 years, raising my boy, and I feel like I'm a very devoted father. I try very hard with him, and I've done the best I can, and while I have struggled with alcohol in the past few years, like I said, I feel like I'm high functioning, for whatever that means. But, he's always come first. And, I try to give myself credit for that. But it was hard. It was really hard, because I was very much in love with his mother, and that hurt me deeply, and it continued to hurt, it wasn't like the divorce was done and everything's fine, like that's my child's mother. He still loves his mother. He still wants his mother in his life, and I try to facilitate that as much as I can. I try to encourage it as much as I can, and it's been, there's been a couple things happen over the years where I don't like watching his mother struggle, and she has struggled at certain points throughout the years, and it sort of brought me right back into it again, because
You're a fixer.
yeah, and it always comes up with her being, sort of the damsel in distress, and I feel like I can come in and fix everything. I want to come in and fix everything, and because I do forgive, as much hell as she put me through, I try, and I do forgive, forgive her for that. But man, it took a long time, it took a long time, and it really, like I said, that podcast with you, seeing you or whatever, just how I randomly came across that, it felt like an answered prayer, because for so many years I've been trying to move on, and I felt stuck in the same spot,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt like there's nothing I can do about it, because when you're a single parent, you're working, you're holding everything together, you're already trying to do everything you can do,
Mm-hmm.
and you feel like, that's enough. I don't need. When am I gonna work on myself? I can't
It's
work
just
on
the way
myself.
it's supposed to be.
I wake up, I go to work, I come home, I take care of my son, like I do everything. Yes, once he goes down for bed, I take an hour and a half, and and that was the excuse. I gave myself for the longest time. It's like I'm doing everything I have to do. It's okay to drink a pint of whiskey every night. Weeknights, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because I just learned you get in that habit and where like you don't wake up feeling hungover, you wake up feeling like you just woke up, because that's how I woke up yesterday, and that's how I woke up the day before. This isn't an odd feeling, I don't feel like I'm draggy. I feel like I do every morning, give it a couple hours and a few cups of coffee and I'll be fine, and yeah. When I first saw the podcast, I realized I got to stop living the lie. I got to stop lying to myself, because it's not doing anything. Because whether people know it or not, they know it. Like people I interact with, they may not know that I'm going home and drinking every night. They may not know that I'm doing this or doing that or whatever, but they see it. Like they may not know what they see, but it reflects in the personality and the person I am, and so yeah, man, that's the first time, I'd never told anybody about this boxing. That was my secret. That felt like a really big deal for me, and just saying it out loud really helped me to start dealing with it and to start taking the steps in my life that I needed to take to get to where I want to be, and I'm not there yet. I can say I've had more sober days maybe this year so far than I had last year, and it's only February, so that's a big thing, for me. I feel like I've been doing great lately, but I'm not perfect, I still have those nights a week where I slip up and, I do drink. And I try not to be too hard on myself for it, because I don't want to be. Who wants to be hard on themselves? I feel like, at some points you do and at some points you don't. But, like you said, we started going to church a few months ago, and, I think, which my mom's always been the church going type, so every Sunday she's always bugged me to go. It wasn't the first time I'd been to church at Salem. It wasn't the first time I'd taken Reese there or whatever, but I'd always looked at it as more of a chore, where I just gotta, it's good.
Others.
Yeah, it's good. Mom likes seeing me here. I like having Reese in the church. That's the right thing to do. To get the kid used to it, and that was the reason I went. And at some point, it started connecting with me a little bit more. We started talking, and I realized, my faith to me has always been kind of a little bit, I don't know the word to describe it, vague, like I've always felt like there is a God, and you can communicate with God and this and that, and I've never really put so much validity in the exact words of the Bible stories and this and that. But the more I've been going lately, certain things just connect with you. Certain things you hear at church just connect with you, and it's odd how, there's hundreds of people in that room, but it feels like the preacher's saying something to you right then at the right time, and it got to a point now to where like I needed, I felt it a few weeks ago, like I needed to go to church because we missed for weather or something like that, and Reese was bickering about it first thing in the morning. I don't want to go to church. I was like, no, Reese, we're going to church. Which that would have been an excuse before, like, oh, Reese is upset. We don't have to. Okay, well, sorry, Mom. But no, like I needed to go to church. And man, I don't know. I feel like I've just been talking. Ask me something.
No, I'd like to talk kind of through this because as someone, you started coming around. I really started becoming your friend, I would say, is at Reese's birthday party back when he was just a baby, when it was at your house. That was kind of where it went from you being Drew's friend to me and Becca trying to come in and also, be a community together. And I remember you walking through all this stuff, and I remember the hurt but I also remember watching how hard you fought for him. And that's something that resonated in me because that's the same thing that happened to me. Was Braylon was 2, and here we are, dope sick, about to lose our house. I had a title pawn on my truck. They were looking for it. About to lose my car. We'd already been found out before, and we had slipped up. I couldn't really call that a relapse because I hadn't found recovery yet. I just quit using for a couple of months until we thought we could sneak again. And during that second time, that's what I also did. I had to step back, and I was like, man, the same thing's happening in my life right now that I promised wasn't going to happen to my son. Like, I should have lost him. There was talks about that, had we not have stopped, that would have ended up happening. And I remember how much of a source of strength Reese has always been for you.
Oh, yeah. Without him, I would have been way off the edge, I mean, as far as, without Reese, I told you, like, the divorce and the infidelity, that's something, hypothetically, before that happened, I always told myself, okay, well, hypothetically, what if this happened? Oh, well, if that were to happen, I would just kill myself. That would be so awful that I just wouldn't want to deal with life anymore, and boom, there it would go, with my son being a factor, like, you don't have that choice, And I faith, and there were a lot of times, even with him, I remember one of my darkest moments was, he was probably, 2 something, and man, I was just down, I can't remember what exactly had happened at the time. There have been so many happenstances over the years, between me and him and his mother. And, dude, I was done, I was making my last will and testament, sitting there on the phone. I was telling my son how much I loved him and I'm sorry, this life, don't let life get you down like it got your daddy down. And I was there, man. I was gonna do it. I was done, and he was 2 ish, somewhere around there, to the point where when he's asleep at night, like I knew he was out, he was done. He wasn't waking up. Like, that's how he slept. Thank God he's been that most of, the baby stuff was a little rough, but toddler on, pretty much when he slept, he slept. He woke up that night, and he woke up and just hearing that daddy, he started crying because he needed me, and man, just that's one of the moments, and I was drunk that night, obviously, so I did what I did whenever I heard him, I responded. I did my dad stuff, even on nights where had a few too many, like I still, that baby monitor wakes me up every time, or did. He doesn't sleep with the baby monitor anymore. He sleeps next to me, but yeah, and that stuck with me, and and I woke up the next morning, and I almost didn't even remember, making the video or whatever, which what a shame, because if he wouldn't have woke up, I might have done something, and not even that I wouldn't have even remembered, but I woke up the next day, and like I pulled up my gallery and I saw that video, and then it all came back to me, and it made me sick to my stomach, man, like I deleted it right away. I couldn't even watch it. And, like you said, there's so many, when you struggle with substances, there's so many moments that are life-changing. I'm going to quit now, and you get better, and one thing I'm starting to realize is that there's a difference between sobriety and recovery, and I've heard somebody else, you have videos pop up in your phone and this and that, but sobriety sucks, just going from living life the way you're living and then just taking out all the substances that make it fun, that sucks. It sucks living that way. And it's like, well, I still want to have fun, but I'm learning that, you got to start filling your life with other stuff. You have to fill that void somehow. And that's one thing the church has really given me. And that's the only reason I'm here right now doing this podcast with you, is because, my story's not something I'm itching to tell, and because like you said, it's something, I don't have a success story yet. I feel like I'm on my redemption arc, I'm in act 2 of what's going to end up being a really good story, I hope, but I'm not there yet. But, the reason I'm here talking to you right now is because I'm trying to find that way to let God lead my life where he wants it to be, and that's one thing they always talked about in church. We talked about this earlier, and like, just give God the reins, let God take control of your life. And I always thought, okay, what do I do? What do I say? Take control. Here I am, like, what does that mean? If I say it, I'm going to win the lottery next day, or is Reese's mom going to come back and all is forgiven and this and that, like, what does it mean to just let God take control of your life? And I'm trying to embrace, like, what that means, now that I'm finally starting to live life a little bit more clear-headed. I'm just trying to embrace whatever opportunities come my way, like, just us going to church together is one thing that's helped out a lot. Somehow the music director at church figured out I play guitar, asked me to play guitar in the church, which I want to do. I haven't rehearsed or anything like that yet, but I've talked to him about it, and I've got the app on my phone to get all the music and this and that. So it's it's a goal that I want to do, and I don't think I'm ever going to be ready. I've used the excuse for so long that, like, I'm not ready. I'm not, if I can do this first, then I'll be ready. And, I've heard you say on here a lot, you felt God calling you or whatever. I don't want to miss the call. You know,
Same.
like I don't want to miss the
Same.
call. Like I'm not
Ignored
ready
it
yet.
so
I'm
long.
not ready yet, but I might not ever be ready. And you know, I told you when you first asked me to come on here earlier, I was like, no way. You know, I'm not ready for that. And then I thought about if this might be God's way of calling me to do something. All I could hear in my head was, I didn't ask if you were ready, you know. And that's, if God's calling me right now, He's calling me. He's not asking if I'm ready, you know. I know He knows where I'm at, you know what I mean? He wouldn't, you know, He knows the level of readiness, and you know, for Him to call anyway. And I don't know what my story could do to help anybody else other than, you know, it is possible to come out of the darkness. You know, I'm hoping the light, that I feel like I'm finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Not only seeing it, but like I'm realizing it's not another freight train coming my way. It might actually be the way to a better life. Amen. You know, and for me, you know, it's been a lot of being open, being honest with people that I know care. You know, I'm finally starting to accept that there are people in my life that care. I can open up. I don't have to lie to people. You know, people can still love me for the truth. You know, they love me. They love you no matter what. You know, people have a high capacity for forgiveness. And I don't know. Sort of lost my train of thought there.
It's all good. It happens to me all the time. And what's funny about this to me is I've had the same doubts. You know, a lot of the people that I talk to, I only have the answers because I've experienced the similar situations. Especially with the I'm not ready. You know, I'll never be ready either.
Yeah.
And that was a conversation I had with somebody, and they told me that God doesn't call the equipped, He equips the called. So I lean into that, you know, and while this isn't the most polished, you know, Grammy award-winning podcast, each week we get stories of hope from these other people.
Yeah, well, and I know it helps people because it helped me, you know. You know, I wouldn't even be making the steps that I've been making. I wouldn't have, you know, if it wasn't for, you know, this podcast.
And that's what it's doing. I'm doing the same thing as you right now in this moment, is just showing up. And of course I put him on the spot. You know, I texted him today asking him about this just because God asked me to, you know, with the news that I had gotten.
And I thought you were talking about doing it tomorrow. So when you texted me and I was already 15 minutes late, I was like, oh, I really don't have to prepare. Didn't even get my good jeans on.
No, we're way better when we're not prepared. I promise. But through these situations and through doing this, you know, like even though it's not been perfect, there's been several technical issues and microphones messed up and just Satan somewhere in all of it. God still uses a small portion. And when it comes back and you get to answer, when He sends you questions on something, you know, I can speak from experience. I can't quote to you the Bible either. I can only tell you what God's done in my life.
Yeah, that's
and you know,
I wish I could.
What's
really
crazy is that once we start reading the Bible, we'll be like, oh, this is the same problem. It's in there too, man. So He's going to open doors and He's going to give you opportunities. And I am learning myself that when I can step outside of what everybody else thinks, that's what I was getting to here, is in the message I put, if we can step outside of what everyone else thinks about us and only worry for 30 minutes about what God thinks about us, you know, what differences could be made in this world.
That's hard to do, though. That's the
it's
thing.
Extremely hard to do.
Because it's so easy, especially, you know, with the substance abuse history and all that, like it's so easy to not like yourself, you know? It's so easy to look in the mirror and all you see is a screw up, you know? And I think that's one redeeming thing about, you know, kids is I spend a lot of time around little kids, you know, nowadays, and the kids don't see you like that, you know? Kids don't judge you, you know? Especially your own kids, you know, they look at you like superhero, you know, and even though they see you in your worst moments. But yeah, you know, part of me while I still, have a lot, I'm proud of what I've done, as a parent, as a father, I want to keep moving on and be better, and that's one thing that inspires me to try to keep making those steps. Is Reese is getting to an age now to where I want him to see me doing stuff like being active in the church, Hell, I'd like to coach baseball, like I want to be that dad. And, that inspires me even more to just, keep on trying and keep on plugging away and stacking good days. That's what it's been about for me lately. It's just stacking as many good days as I can, and I may slip up now and then, but that doesn't have to be, and that's one thing that took me a long time too, is like just slipping up a day here, slipping up a day there. That doesn't have to mean restart. That doesn't have to mean, okay, well, you screwed that up, now it's just back to living life the same old way. No, it's not, You can screw up one day and do good, the next. And that still counts, that still counts as adding good days. And, that's what I'm trying to do right now. And I feel like if, good days turn into good weeks, turn into good months, turn into good years, and, I feel like enough focus, on doing the right things, occupying your mind with the right things, which has been the biggest part for me.
The biggest part.
It's, as I'm my own worst enemy, and I always have been. I overthink things, I overanalyze things, I replay conversations in my head constantly, especially with his, my son's mother or whatever. Which that's been a big part of the last few months of my life too, is realizing that I have to set up boundaries, in my life where boundaries need to be set, because you realize that certain things keep drawing you back into certain actions, they keep you right where you're at, and his mother is one of those people where I've had to set boundaries, because I don't want to go backwards anymore, nor do I want to stay in the same spot anymore, which is where I feel like I've been forever. I'm getting intruders here.
Yeah.
Hey, dogs. But yeah, man, it's, I'm trying to do it one day at a time, get better and better, and just, enjoy life for what it is. And like I said, the boundaries on your biggest triggers is one thing that I've been focusing on, I got to a point to where I realized, my entire inner monologue, at some point I lost that. Like it became, I wasn't thinking to myself. I was just constantly talking to her, I was constantly having conversations with her. That's all I thought about in my head, was having those conversations with her, conversations that would never turn out to be that way, that would immediately spark an argument that never end up happening, and I waste all my time and energy thinking about that. And then I turn around and you just want to quiet those thoughts at the end of the night, and that was a habit that I was in for years and years and years and years. And, and I'm just now starting to come out of, thank the Lord,
And it's been really cool the thing about when you're in it, it's hard to see growth. All we see is us tearing ourselves down more, but from the outside looking in, it's kind of the opposite. We can't see necessarily people tearing themselves down so much, even though we may know they're dirt, but when we see the change take place, and you can just see it in people, your energy's different than what I remember you going from happily married to absolutely devastated, not having answers, to starting to figure it out as a dad, to now you're killing it, bro. Like, yeah. I'm so proud to call you my friend. And I'm so glad that this is never about perfection. There's with some people, going back out ain't an option because of fentanyl and stuff. But
yeah,
this is not about a perfection. This is about having people meeting you where you are and having God meeting you exactly where you are. And I'll never forget that you told me when I asked you, what's your relationship with Jesus look like? You said it was Lieutenant Dan yelling in the rain.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Over the last 4 months I'm not trying to influence you much on it. I'm letting you find him for yourself. I've not bugged you a whole lot about it.
Yeah, but you always text at like the right times.
And that's the way God works, you know.
You're the
just
closest
like,
thing to an effective sponsor that I've ever had.
Just like when you were having the thoughts and Reese woke up just in time, that's not spontaneous. You know what I mean? That's God. He's been in the story the whole time, even in the mess. He's there with us.
Yeah.
And it's been incredible because if I like one time I missed a service, he gave me crap for it, and I needed that. You know, I need it just as much as you. And watching you heal helps heal me. You know what I mean? Because it goes to show that what we're doing here works, and what we're doing here is needed. And it's not about perfection; it's about the honesty. You know, and that's what you said is I don't have to lie anymore, and that's redeeming.
Yeah.
And it went from Lieutenant Dan yelling in the rain, I hate to put you on blast, but a couple of weeks ago I looked over and I saw you singing, dude, and I just wanted to start crying because...
I told you that was the first time I felt like I recognized the song in church. Like, oh, I've heard this one before, I know it.
My heart was so happy, but I didn't want to put attention on you. It made you feel so weird, but just watching it, it's undeniable. I'm sitting here and I get to see it. Like, I'm getting to watch you get it right more and more, and it's not about tearing them down when they get it wrong, you know? It's not what it's about. It's about being there for them when they trust you enough to come and talk to you about it. You know, that's a big deal. He had never talked about some of these things with people, and I'd never known, even though, you know, me and Chris didn't always hang out, but I used to use drugs with a lot of his friends that was in his circle growing up from the time they were little teenagers up. And a lot of them are died, you know, like a lot of them are dead.
Yeah, that was another rough thing. You know, I hate to keep going backwards, but yeah, I had a whole clique of friends in high school, you know, people that you have a million memories with,
Yeah,
you know.
Some of the best.
And they're gone, you know, they're a whole generation, you know, it seems like. I have 4, you know, more than that, but 4 very close, dear friends that are gone and dead. You know, people that I would, you know, if I ran into them on the street today, I would trust them today after not talking with them for 10 years. Hey, can you watch my kid for a second? I can't believe it. You know, like, you know, little Chris, Rachel, Becca, you know, Jeremiah, you know, that was a tough one for me because me and him were real close. But yeah, that's another thing, you know, I'm just grateful for. You know, I'm grateful I never fell back in there, and I feel selfish sometimes for, you know, over the years, you know, getting to the point to where you're so down that you want to, you know, take that final leap or whatever, but, and then you just think about it, it's such a shame that, you know, people are gone.
I'm going to ask you a question here.
All right.
So with that being said, and people out there in active addiction, and they feel like they're at the Lieutenant Dan screaming in the rain at God, what would you say to that person now?
I mean, what worked for me kind of is just, I don't want to say fake it till you make it, you know, but kind of, I started forcing myself into the actions, forcing myself to go to church, you know, forcing myself to be honest, you know, with not only people around me, but myself, you know, and make the changes you can make. You know, I heard Jordan Peterson say something about, you know, don't be afraid to make changes that are too small, you know, like, because if you can start doing that small change, you know, okay, well, I'm not going to drink on Mondays anymore. That was my first step, you know, when I can't do Mondays anymore, you know, it's not allowed. And, you know, it got in my mind where I didn't even, it's Monday, I don't even think about it as I'm driving past the liquor store, you know. And then Monday turned into, okay, I'm going to do Monday and Tuesday. And then all of a sudden, well, like I wake up on Wednesday morning and, man, I feel really good this morning. I feel like eating breakfast, you know, like I've got a lot of energy. So, and that just, you know, I texted you a while back, you know, about, I've got a few days going here, man. I really got some momentum. And that was, you know, at the start of, where I started really piling on good days and what I'm really trying to keep going. And And, AA doesn't work for everybody. There's no one fix for everybody or for every single problem, and I just say, it's not going to be perfect, but it can get better. It can certainly get better, and I'm starting to see that with my life right now. The more I focus on the right things and what I need to focus on, it feels like those things come back to you, um, and I'm just trying to be open to whatever's going to come my way, which is why I'm sitting here putting myself in an uncomfortable situation talking about my life.
Absolutely. That's a really good answer. What I would attach to that would be, submitting it to God. Like Chris said, the biggest part is getting yourself in that building, man. And I understand a lot of people's grief with that. And, I've been to church for a lot of things other than Jesus. I used to chase girls to church, and I used to do it to appease my mom. I used to do it to appease Becca's mom, all the things. But where I started going, just like you, and stayed in it, he's starting to change my heart. And, you do start having a different attitude. You do start setting healthy goals. And that comes with a little bit of submission. And, over time, even if you're coming just to get in a routine of doing something, eventually it changes to where you do get there and you're hungry for him. It's not, you're not hungry for nothing. You're not coming to make me happy anymore. I'm not coming to make you happy. You're coming because you got to have it, and I'm coming because I got to have it. Otherwise, my whole week's out of whack. And, one thing that I've learned is I've went from a job to where I was in complete control of it to I'm no longer over this job and I'm working under other bosses. And I've come in there and, I'm not my normal, even what I was a couple of months ago. I'm a lot calmer than I used to be. I don't have to be in charge, and that's not something I used to have to be in charge. That's why I get myself in these positions where people don't tell me what to do. But through working on myself and doing this is I've learned to let loose of the reins as well. And, I can step back and I can react differently. And unfortunately, there was one guy there that about a year ago, me and him really got into it. And I've not seen him since. And he's on this job and he's a foreman on this job. And I was very nervous about that one thing, like I'm okay with not being in charge. I'm okay with you telling me what to do, but he's here and I don't know what's going to happen because I can't control how he reacts. And if he reacts, how am I going to control how I react? You know what I mean? So I really was scared of that, but we went into it and, God, just like God, he'd already went ahead of all that. We go in and we're not grieved over that. People argue. People's not going to get along. And the crazy thing was the argument was about Donald Trump. And, I hate the world that we live in to where we could just chalk people off because, like, for me, I wouldn't even say I'm a Trump supporter anymore. Like, I really hate everybody, you know what I mean? It's a slave system in Satan's world. But I hate that we're chalking off relationships just because of one man that ain't even in our lives, you know what I mean? Versus listening to God and trying to love these people that maybe we're not just alike, and we do got different stances and we do got, but just going in and I leaned into him that he was going to go ahead and take care of that. That way I don't want there to be issues at work, you know what I mean? I don't want there to be problems. I never want to be a problem to others there. And I was really worried about that these last 2 weeks, and I'm just grateful that God knows better than I do, and he works better than I do.
Yeah, that's one thing that's definitely come into my life lately is like the more you force yourself to believe it and to say it, let God take control, just let God take control, just give it to God, that really starts working after a while, because there's been, over the years I worry about so much other stuff, where's my life going, relationships, this and that, like I've come to accept it that, preacher's been talking about Job, and
that was the first thing I got shared to me was I said I need something to read. He said this is where you're at, send me to Job. So I was like,
and finally I'm starting to have faith that God's gonna, he's preparing something, and even if it's not in this lifetime, I've had dark years. I might have some more dark decades. I hope not. Fingers crossed. I don't. We'll work on it to make it as best as I can. But there's an eternal reward. I feel like, and
Amen.
even if a lot of people live in suffering, which is, you start thinking about it, even just saying the word suffering coming out of my mouth, like, look at us, the way we live. There's so many millions of people in the world that live in dirt shacks, and truly suffer, and how blessed we are to be able to sit here in a nice home and talk about our, struggles with this or that and to let it out there. But I forgot where I was going then. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there.
Yeah, I'm thankful for God's willingness for second chances, and just like you said, is when you start trying it, it starts working. You don't have to be a perfect edge creature.
Yeah.
You don't have to live in, even though we strive to live by the laws of man or by God, we still fail. And I still do things every day. I'm still a sinner. I'm still not perfect. But when we start leaning on Him and trusting in Him like He tells us to, He's quick to show up, and I'm grateful for that.
And for me, it's also been the realization that, maybe I'm right where I was supposed to be all along. I had a dream earlier this week, when we addressed this earlier, like having to move back in with the parents and take care of the kid and all that. Like, it sucks, at this point in life. I had a dream the other night, that something I've longed for the past few years. Like, I was back in my old apartment. I loved my apartment. The one I had, all to myself, didn't need any roommates, that was my place. Me and Reese had moved right back into the same thing. I had everything I wanted. I was telling him, oh, Reese, check this out, this and that, this is ours. And then, and he looks around and he's disappointed. I can't remember exactly, it's a dream, so I don't remember exactly. And I realized, like, if God had given me everything I'd asked for this whole time, like, Reese's life might be miserable, We live in a place now where he's in a great neighborhood. He's surrounded by wonderful kids. It snowed earlier this week. My brother-in-law's kids were over at my house. People trust me with their children, which is something that, responsible people,
Yeah.
I had 5 kids out there under my watch, sledding down the hill or whatever. And Reese is just having the time of his life with his best little friends running around. And I realized maybe God's got me exactly where I'm supposed to be, and it's time for me to start acting like it. It's time for me to start being grateful instead of woeful about all the things that have happened, and to embrace the light at the end of that tunnel. I've been waiting for it for so long, and part of it was realizing that what I was doing to hold myself back, and just start letting go and letting God.
And that's what happens is, we try everything that we know how to do to make it work, and it's not His will, so it doesn't work. And when we do start falling into His will a little bit, and it starts with simple prayer. That was the first thing I recommended you start doing, was praying. And when we start falling into that, we develop a new way of thinking. It goes from, I can't do this anymore, to, you know what, I can do this though.
Yeah.
And it starts with the small changes.
Yeah.
I worked on all the small things. I mean, I did that since I've got clean, and you can confirm that with the mother-in-law. I'm texting her all the time. This is what I'm working on this month. This is what I'm working on. And it's allowed me here a decade later, 11 years later, which still, I can still relive all this stuff like it was yesterday. It don't seem like it was 11 years ago in my head, when I can taste the drain in my nose still.
Yeah.
I still remember what it tasted like. I
do
still
too.
remember how I felt.
Yep.
And I still remember the chase and the longing and the just the total overhaul of my brain, only worried about that and nothing else. And I remember the change happened. And I remember all these things that you're talking about early, and with the start small and work on this and work on this, and when this starts working. And I'm just grateful that you get to a place of working on these small things to where okay, now I'm fit enough that I can start working on these bigger things.
That's another, yeah.
And he did that for me, he opened the door to where I got to meet my dad and expose the greatest hurt in my life. That was one of the core causes of my pain in my life was I didn't know where I came from. I didn't know, what he was like. Did I get robbed? What happened?
Off on a whole nother subject here because I got a adoption story too. I met my biological parents when I was 27. We'll say that for another episode.
But yeah, he just gives the ability of, you got, at first we think we can't do it. So we do start on the little things, and then the little things, hey, we can work on the medium things. And then you run out of medium things and you're like, uh-oh, it's time to unload the big ones.
Yeah.
But the crazy thing is he unlocks them doors. He didn't allow me to meet my dad until I worked on all these other little things. That way that the version that I took to Florida, he was calm enough to sit there and just let him talk. I didn't have to control the conversations. I was basically a mockingbird. I was just sitting there watching and observing and seeing what happened. And when I walked away from that place, I had a great sense of I could see everything and I understood it all. And I don't think that I would have done that had I found him 15 years ago. It'd have been an ugly fight.
Yeah.
It would have been a me blame game, instead of just sitting there listening. And unfortunately, that story didn't have a storybook ending. I kind of come away understanding the situation of why he wasn't there and, why things were the way they were. But God filled that hole that you talked about. We start putting these healthy things in these holes that we got instead of the substances. And that only happens when we do get an amount of time away from the substance,
Yeah.
Like you said, one day you wake up and you're like, wow, I feel normal. I feel different. I feel better.
Yeah, and that's what I'm really excited about life right now for the first time in a long time because, once you start building those good days, like you said, you can start tackling even bigger stuff. Like I told you earlier, told Reese, I'm trying to quit smoking. I haven't quit smoking yet, not even close, working on it. But, part one is I don't want to smoke around my son anymore. I don't want him to see me with a cigarette in my mouth anymore. So in his mind, I'm done with it. And that's one of those goals that you get once you start getting the momentum, you feel like you can do other things, I've been trying to exercise more. I've been eating healthy for lunch, the stuff that, I'm just trying to embrace, what's coming in life instead of bemoaning the past so much, and I really, a stronger relationship with God has really helped me get there, and I'm not there yet, not in my faith or, anything else, but life's a journey, and I feel like hopefully there's brighter days coming ahead than what have been behind.
There absolutely is for you, Chris, and it's easy to get dwelled up on I live with my parents, but I know your mom.
Yeah.
And I know how grateful she is for you, and
and that's
God's allowed you to be there for your dad through all this stuff. So God does have a way of putting you. That's our biggest thing is we think, oh, I'm so far behind. And realistically is we are exactly where we're supposed to be in that moment. And it might not be for the reasons that we think, and we might not ever even see it for ourselves. But I know that you have a mother that's grateful for you, and I know that you have a mother that it makes her very happy seeing you in that church and that you're doing it for you. You're not doing it to appease nobody else anymore.
No, it's definitely for me now. You really start to feel the impact in your life,
Amen.
Yeah, I think it doesn't matter how you feel about it. God's going to put you where He's going to put you, for whatever reason, and you can like it or not like it, but
you can run from it or you can answer it.
Yeah, but I'm finally getting to the point where I'm trying to answer that call in my life. So here I am.
So grateful that you're here. And, before we let go, I would like to say a couple of things that if you are out there and you're still struggling, it's okay. But I'd like to challenge you to have an honest talk with somebody this week. If you've been thinking about confronting somebody, I pray that this be the week that you do it, because we are if you believe in God, you got to believe that we're running out of time, and we're running out of time. And I read a news article today where we got a brand new chemical being injected into the drugs now
I saw that.
it's not even a drug. It's an adulterant or a contaminant. Like, it's not even drugs anymore. And the reason why is because people are still seeking stronger dope than fentanyl. And it completely blows my mind.
I pray for our kids.
And I met a person, and she's really special to me, and unfortunately she just went through her 4-year loss of her son the other day due to fentanyl. And it breaks my heart, because since I've started doing this, of course it's changed my algorithm to where I see more, and I get these things called the epidemic walls pop up, and I got to where I'm meeting women like Sharon and see what she shares, and there's so many moms and dads, and this fentanyl's taking out entire generations, like you said. I mean, it's robbing us of the most brightest and brilliant people, and it's not. I've seen babies accidentally exposed to it dying, and it breaks my heart. So we got to figure something out, because we are running out of time on this. There's not always going to be another tomorrow, and it starts with honesty, guys, and it starts with us submitting. Our way sucks. I tried everything that I could. It sucked, and I couldn't figure it out, even though I thought, this is what God wants for me. I was there justifying, this is what God wants for me, knowing that that's still what I wanted, because I wasn't ready to give up that control. But I'd like to challenge you this week. Talk to somebody about it.
It helps.
And be gentle, and if they come to you, be open to it, and be there for them, and listen to them, and do what they need you to do, because that might be the only person that they talk to about it. And I, for one, I'm sick of losing friends. I've lost 33, and he's one of 4 left out of his huge friend group. Like he said, it's taking out really good people that we need here. And there's something that we can do to make a difference now. And with all this new legislature and everything, I'm really excited for this year, 2026. And I'm hoping that this can be the year that we put a big change on this. You got anything else you'd like to add?
No, just the big amen to that. I'm terrified of fentanyl, and it's not going to be too long for me and you were raising teenagers. And,
I know.
If that would have been out there when I was a teenager, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
Sure.
Because I wouldn't be here, and you probably
wouldn't be in the graveyard together.
So prayers for the upcoming generation, and thanks for having me, man, and thanks for being there. You've been a very good friend to me, and I wouldn't be where I'm at right now if it wasn't for you and what you're doing. So I appreciate you letting God work through you.
And I want you to know it helps me just as much as it helps you doing this.
Good.
You know what I mean? It keeps
iron sharpens iron, right?
Amen. So let this be the week that we discuss it with somebody, and let's be honest this week about something, even if it isn't drugs. Something that's been bugging us, something that's been holding us back. Maybe we give it to God, maybe we discuss it with somebody else, and may we find our butt in a church pew on Sunday.
Amen.
That's really all I got for this week, and I'd like to thank Chris for coming and being so vulnerable. And we ain't gotta be perfect. This is not a path of perfection, because none of us would be qualified. But what it is it slowly changes our way of thinking, and that slowly changes the way we live our life. And for that, I'm gonna keep coming back, because that's what God's called us to do. And I'm grateful for you guys, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.